The desert wind carried whispers that night, soft, mournful, almost human. It was the kind of night when the stars felt closer than the earth itself, when every shadow could be danger and every sound, a memory. Cole Hart rode alone through that endless stretch of New Mexico desert, his horse stumbling beneath him, both man and beast worn thin by the chase. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, his knuckles raw from holding the reins too long. Behind him, somewhere beyond the dunes, were the faint echoes of gunfire and men yelling his name. Cole didn't look back. He'd spent years running, first from war, then from justice, and now from himself. He wasn't a bad man by choice. He'd once believed in right and wrong, in law and land, but the West had a cruel way of breaking men. A bounty gone wrong had left his partner dead and his reputation in ashes. Now, his only company was guilt, and the only thing that could save him was the one thing no one dared to cross, Apache land. The sun had barely begun to rise when his horse stumbled over a patch of rock and went down hard. Cole hit the ground, tasting dust and blood. He tried to stand, but his knees buckled beneath him. The horse didn't move again. Cole pressed a trembling hand to its neck and whispered, "You done good, boy." Then, with a heavy heart, he unbuckled his saddle and carried it on foot toward the faint shimmer of water he thought he saw in the distance. By the time he reached the stream, his lips were cracked, his throat burned raw. He fell to his knees, scooping water into his mouth like a starving man. The world tilted, and just as darkness began to close around his vision, he heard something, a soft rustle, like the sound of a bowstring being drawn. "Don't move, cowboy." The voice was firm, melodic, and carried the weight of command. Cole froze, raising his head slowly. Standing on the ridge above him was a young Apache woman. Her skin glowed like bronze beneath the rising sun, her hair long and dark, braided with feathers dyed crimson. Her bow was drawn tight, an arrow aimed straight at his chest. Cole held up his hands. "I ain't here to fight." Her eyes narrowed. "White men always say that. Before they take. Do I look like I got anything left to take?" He rasped. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she lowered her bow, though her eyes never softened. "You're trespassing." "I know," he said quietly, lowering his gaze. "Just needed water. I'll be gone soon enough." He tried to stand, but his legs gave way, and he crumpled to the dirt. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him was her face, fierce, but touched by something he couldn't name. When he woke again, it was night. The scent of smoke and herbs filled the air. He blinked and saw her tending a small fire nearby, her movements smooth and deliberate. His wounds had been cleaned and bandaged with strips of soft cloth. "You're lucky," she said without looking at him. "The desert kills most who try to cross it alone. Why didn't you let it take me?" Her hand paused mid-stir over a pot. "Because I'm not the desert," she said simply. He studied her in silence, the strength in her posture, the calm in her eyes. She carried herself like someone who belonged wholly to this land, as if every tree, every gust of wind, knew her name. "What do they call you?" he asked after a while. "Ayana," she replied. "It means, eternal blossom." "Cole Hart," he said, his voice low. "Though most just call me Trouble." For the first time, a flicker of amusement crossed her face. "Then maybe you should rest before you cause more of it." The days passed in slow rhythm. Ayana taught him how to move quietly, how to read the tracks of animals, how to listen to the land instead of trying to fight it. In return, Cole fixed her traps, mended tools, and shared stories of the world beyond the desert, the gunfights, the saloons, the loneliness of the trail. At night, they sat by the fire, the air thick with the scent of burning sage and the whisper of the wind through the canyon. He found himself drawn to her voice, to the quiet strength behind it. She spoke of her tribe, of her father, Chief Taza, a leader torn between defending his people and dreaming of peace with the settlers. She spoke of loss, of raids that had taken her mother when she was only a child. "You hate my kind," Cole said one night, his tone heavy. "I hate what your kind has done," she answered softly. "But hate is a fire that burns the hand that holds it. I've learned to live with the smoke." Her words hit him deep, cutting through the walls he'd built around himself. He found himself wanting to know everything about her, her laughter, her fears, the way her eyes reflected the firelight when she spoke of dreams. One evening, a storm rolled over the desert. Thunder cracked across the sky, and rain poured down in sheets. They huddled in the cave, watching the water rush past the entrance. Cole removed his hat, running a hand through his wet hair. "You'll be gone when the storm passes," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. He looked at her then, really looked at her, the curve of her cheek, the strength in her jaw, the sadness she tried to hide. Maybe, he said after a long silence. But right now, this storm's all that matters. The space between them seemed to hum with something unspoken. His hand brushed against hers, and she didn't pull away. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then she turned her face toward him, and he saw the same hunger, the same fear, reflected in her eyes. Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, two hearts collided beneath its light. They said no words, made no promises. The night became a blur of warmth and whispers, of soft laughter and tears that neither could explain. When dawn broke, the rain had stopped, and the desert shimmered like glass. Cole stood at the cave's mouth, hat in hand, watching the horizon. He turned once, saw her still sleeping, her hair spilling across the furs like a river of ink. Something in him ached to stay, but he knew the world wouldn't allow it. He placed his silver locket beside her, his last piece of family, and walked away without a word. Ion awoke to the sound of silence. He was gone. She found the locket, opened it, and traced her fingers over the faded photograph inside. Then she closed her eyes and whispered his name to the wind. Days became weeks. The tribe returned from their hunting grounds, and whispers began to follow her wherever she went. Her father's eyes lingered too long, his silence heavier than words. Then one morning, as the sun rose red over the mesa, Iona pressed a trembling hand to her belly and felt the faintest flutter of life. Her breath caught, her heart raced. In that moment, she understood. The cowboy had left his mark, not only on her heart, but on the future itself. 9 months later, the desert was no longer quiet. The same wind that once whispered peace now carried the smell of gunpowder and smoke. Apache drums beat like thunder through the canyons, warning the tribe of an approaching storm not of nature, but of men. Soldiers had been seen crossing the Red Mesa, armed and restless. The Apache village prepared for battle, every man sharpening blades, every woman gathering what little they could protect. And amid all of it, Iona sat in her tent, her hands trembling over her swollen belly, her heart torn between fear and hope. The baby was due any day now. Her father, Chief Taza, walked in and stood silently over her. His weathered face was carved with lines of grief and worry. "The soldiers are near," he said softly. "You must hide when the fighting starts." "I will not run," she said firmly, though her voice quivered. "This child carries the blood of both our worlds. If I run, then his life begins in fear." Chief Taza's eyes softened, pride and sorrow mingling. "You are your mother's daughter," he murmured. "Brave and stubborn." He reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, remember, your child is not a curse, but a gift. One day, he may bring what we could not." Outside, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. The first gunshot cracked through the air like the sky breaking apart. The Apache warriors answered with arrows, their war cries rising against the thunder of rifles. Smoke thickened the air, and chaos erupted. Iona's breath came in sharp bursts. The pain began suddenly, tearing through her like fire. She clutched her belly, trying to stay quiet as explosions echoed outside. She was alone in the tent, beads of sweat rolling down her face. The screams of the wounded filled the air, and still, she pushed through the pain. She whispered to the baby, "Hold on, little one, just a little longer." Miles away, in a small border town, Cole Hart sat in a dusty saloon nursing a glass of whiskey. His hair had grown longer, his beard thicker, and his heart heavier. Every night, he dreamed of her, the Apache girl with eyes that haunted him, the one he'd left behind when he thought it was for her safety. He'd tried to forget, but every sunrise reminded him of her name. Then, he overheard two soldiers talking at the bar. "They're heading for the Apache camp near Red Mesa," one of them said. "Chief Taza's tribe, orders are to burn them out by sundown." Cole froze. The glass shattered in his hand, whiskey spilling over his fingers. Red Mesa. The name hit him like a bullet to the chest. Without another word, he tossed money on the counter, grabbed his hat, and stormed out. By the time he reached the canyon's edge, night had fallen. The sky glowed orange from the fires below. Cole's horse whinnied nervously, but he didn't slow down. Bullets whistled through the air as he rode into the chaos. Soldiers shouted when they saw him, but he didn't care. He fired back, taking down 2 men before they even recognized him. He fought like a man possessed, riding through smoke, ducking bullets, dragging wounded Apaches to safety. For a brief moment, the tribe hesitated, unsure whether he was friend or foe. But when they saw him shielding their children and pulling a fallen warrior from the flames, they understood. The white cowboy was not their enemy. Inside the tent, Ayana's cries grew weaker. The world outside was fire and thunder, but her focus was on the life within her. She gritted her teeth, gripping the edge of a blanket. "You will live," she whispered to the child. "No matter what happens, you will live." When the final push came, the air seemed to still. A newborn's cry rose above the sound of battle, raw and pure. Tears filled Ayana's eyes as she held the baby close to her chest. He was small, fragile, but his eyes, when they opened, were unlike anything she had ever seen. Bright blue, the same shade as the desert sky after a storm. She smiled through the pain, whispering, "My little hawk." Then she heard it, someone shouting her name through the chaos. "Ayana, Ayana." Her breath caught. She knew that voice. She turned her head toward the tent flap just as Cole burst through it, his clothes torn, his face streaked with dust and blood. For a second, time stopped. He fell to his knees beside her, disbelief and relief washing over his face. You're alive, and you came back," she whispered weakly, her voice breaking. "I never should've left," he said, his hands trembling as he reached for hers. "I've been running from everything, Ayana, but not anymore. Not from you." He looked down at the baby, his breath catching. "Is he?" Ayana nodded, smiling faintly. "Yours, ours." Cole's throat tightened. He brushed his fingers over the baby's cheek, his heart swelling with a feeling he hadn't known since his mother died, pure, unbreakable love. "He's beautiful," he said, tears streaking his dirt-covered face. "You both are." Outside, the fighting slowed. The soldiers had begun to retreat, confused by the sudden unity of the Apache warriors and the white cowboy fighting side by side. Chief Taza himself entered the tent, his bow still in hand. When he saw the baby, his expression changed from hardness to awe. Cole rose slowly, unsure whether the chief would kill him or not. But Taza said nothing at first. He walked forward, looking down at his grandson, then turned to Cole. "This child," he said in a low, steady voice, "is not born of shame. He is born of courage, of two spirits meant to meet." Cole bowed his head. "All I want is to protect him, and her. I'll do whatever it takes." Taza studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you will stay. You will learn our ways. And he will grow knowing both worlds, the warrior and the settler, the land and the road." The tent filled with silence. Ayana closed her eyes, exhaustion taking her, but a soft smile stayed on her lips. She whispered something in Apache that Cole couldn't understand, then added in English, his name, Talon. "It means strength." Cole repeated it under his breath, feeling the word settle deep in his chest. "Talon Heart," he said. "The name of a man who'll change everything." Years later, those words would prove true. The child born in the heart of war would grow to bridge the gap between the people who once tried to destroy each other. Talon Heart would learn both tongues, ride with both tribes, and bring peace to a land soaked in blood. His story would become legend, the boy who carried two nations in his heart. But that night, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the flickering firelight, the baby's soft cry, and the sound of Ayana's steady breathing as Cole held them close. He looked out toward the desert horizon, where dawn's first light began to creep across the sand. For the first time in years, he wasn't running. He wasn't alone. He pressed a kiss to Ayana's forehead and whispered, "We made it." Outside, the winds began to calm, the fires dying down. The war had stopped, for now. But something greater had been born in its place, the fragile beginning of peace. Cole tightened his arms around his family, watching as the sun climbed higher, painting the world gold. "Sometimes," he murmured, more to himself than anyone, "the biggest miracles don't come from heaven, they're born right here in the dust." And with that, the cowboy who once wandered the earth without purpose found his reason to live, in the woman who saved him, and the child who would one day save them all.